Are you ready to use the fashion design book or the Curvy fashion design book with Procreate? This is a fantastic tool, especially if you're just learning how to digitally draw. And I'm actually a beginner with Procreate. My skill set is definitely in Adobe Illustrator, which is a vectorized software, and that is what the book was created with, was Adobe Illustrator. But we can also use this software with Procreate, and I'm going to show you how to utilize it with the book. Once you download the Procreate file, you're going to unzip the file, and then you're going to open up your iCloud.com if you have an iPad. If you don't have an iPad and you have another tablet, you're going to have to figure that one out on how to get it imported into your Procreate app. Once you've downloaded the zip, unzipped it, and then uploaded it to your iCloud, you're going to be able to go to Import, and then you're going to be able to find the upload in the iCloud. You might have to flip around to try to find it in there. And from there, once you do see it, you're going to click on it to import it. So now we have uploaded that file, and if we go back to Gallery, we can see that that file has been imported. Once you've imported your file, you can go ahead and select the file by pressing the Select button and clicking on the little circle of the file and click Duplicate. We want to duplicate so that we're not messing up the original file. So we can see the original file is selected there. The duplicate is up here now. And in order to change the name of that file, we can close out of that and we can tap on the name. We're going to tap, X out, and hopefully that keyboard has shown up now. I'm going to just do this as a dress. We will test it out as a dress first. And now that entire file has been duplicated, I've renamed it so I can know that my original file is here. I'm not touching it. And I'm going to open it up by clicking on it. So inside the book here, we can see all of these different pages toward the bottom here. Or we can see all of them up here by clicking on the double squares. These are all the layers. So it's the same content here as it is down here as well. Now, in case you don't see this bar down here, you can also go to the settings up here and you can click on the Page Assist. Page Assist going off makes it look like all the layers together, so we definitely want to have that on. We're going to go out of the settings. And underneath the layers, you're going to notice that all of the layers are labeled with what they are. It's the exact same content that's in the printed fashion design book or Curvy fashion design book, and it's labeled. All right, are you ready to start designing? Okay, let's get to it. The first thing is our color. We're going to go through some of these main tools up here and go one by one what they are just so that you understand. The color here is selected as black. If it's selected as white, you might want to select it as black just so that you can see what you're drawing. And in fact, you can choose any color. If you don't want to draw with black, you can also draw with any color there. I'll go ahead and use a color so it stands out against the black on the pages. We have the layers, which you've already learned about. Now, to utilize these layers or to duplicate those layers, we can slide to the left and we can say duplicate. Or we could also lock the layer or delete the layer. We have the erase button here. We have the smudging button here, which kind of smudges your lines or blends them, and then we have the brushes. To get to the brush library, we're going to tap on that brush library, and you can play around with these different brushes here. I really like the Baskerville brush because depending on the amount you're pressing, it gives a different width. It's almost similar to like a calligraphy brush looking thing. It just has a really nice effect to it. But play around and see which lines you like and definitely switch it up. So at this point, you can go ahead and try importing a brush. This is a top stitching brush, which is helpful when you're drawing. We're going to click the plus line, we're going to say import, and we're going to pull that brush in by importing it. I'm going to see that under the calligraphy brush because I created it with one of the calligraphy tools. And you can see this is a top stitching brush. So we can add a little top stitching along the edges of our lines if we want to do that. Now to undo all of those little lines that I did, I'm going to do 2 fingers and tap to undo. Slowly, one by one, undoing each one. Or I could use the undo button there. I want you to go ahead and create another layer just to test out the brushes. We're going to create this first layer and we're not going to even rename it. We're just going to play around with the brushes. Now, if we go to the sketching brush here, we can see that when we're actually drawing, it's really like we're drawing exactly on the pad. If we go to the inking one with the Baskerville, it has kind of a magnetic feel to it that it gives you a little bit more smoother of lines. So you're going to have to play with what you enjoy and what you like. So you can play around with those different tools for the brushes and see which one you like the most. If you really want sketching look to it, but maybe you're having an issue because your lines are not so smooth, you can also press and hold, and that gives you a more smooth line generally, depending on the brush. So if we go back to the inking one, Baskerville, and we tap and we hold, it cleans up that line a lot. So if we're really wanting a nice clean line, tap and hold at the end, and it cleans it up a bit for you. We can also edit that line then by selecting it and moving it. So after we draw it, we hold, and then we can edit the arc. Play around with that a little bit. See what brushes you like to use and get used to how those work. Some of them have a little bit of magnet function to it to smooth out the lines, and others don't. All right, we're going to go back to my favorite one, which is Baskerville, and we're going to select that one. Then we have a select tool, which selects whatever is on the page. You can reduce or increase the size by dragging and moving those dimensions. If you wanted to keep the proportion, you can select uniform before adjusting it, and you can see that uniform keeps it the same proportions. Now I'm going to undo that by double tapping and it goes back, or by pressing the back arrow here. We have different objects that we can create, like rectangles or ellipses, just like that, which we won't be using so often, but it's good to know where they're at, especially maybe you're making a button or something like that, or a tiny little buttonhole like that. And we can go ahead and undo those as well. We have other options here for mainly coloration, and you can really play with these when you get to rendering quite a bit. We're not going to jump into that in this video, but there's a lot of things to play with. Okay, now we have many different options in here, and this is really to do with the canvas. And we're going to get into this one pretty soon here with mirroring, so that we don't have to draw both sides and we only have to draw one side instead. We have other options of doing videos with what we're creating with time lapses and such. All right, so this is the main tools that we need, and to deselect something we can tap again. We get this option over here, which is our line thickness size. You can see that's the brush thickness. So if I choose something much higher, my brush is much thicker. The more I press, the thicker it gets too. That's not the case with every brush, but with the inking and calligraphy, that's often the case based on pressure. We can also reduce the size to make it much more small, like this. We're going to undo those, and we're going to start by creating a layer. We're going to scroll all the way down to the croquis here. The croquis is the main image that you can use, and we can go ahead and duplicate this layer because it's really easy to mess up those layers. That's why I like to duplicate them sometimes and just play around with them. So we've selected her, and in order to get rid of this back side here, because we're only going to be focusing on the front, we're going to drag her over and bring her to the edge, which automatically crops off anything outside of the artboard. As soon as we select the select button, you can see if we go back, it's reduced now. Now, this is not always a great thing to do because, especially if you're using other pages in here, as soon as you go off the artboard, you have to remember that that sketch is going to be disappearing. So keep that in mind. It's not always a good thing. And that's one of the downsides I would say with Procreate, is that's how you actually crop a lot of things. So we have her cropped, and now we want to get her in the center of the page because we're going to be doing a mirror option. So I'm going to unselect here, and I'm going to create a new layer. The new layer is going to be called, I'm going to rename it. I clicked on it, renamed it, and it's going to be called dress. All right, so now what's happened is that we have a plain layer, and we can't see that croquis layer or any other layers either. So in order to see that croquis underneath, we need to drag that layer, the new blank layer, and we need to put it into the croquis layer to create a group. So now we can see we have a group, and the dress layer is above the croquis layer, which means that I can start drawing. So now if we're doing any drawing and we have the dress layer selected, we're drawing on that dress layer. We're not drawing on the croquis layer, which is good because that means we're not going to mess up our croquis. Now we want to go ahead and get this croquis into the middle. And we can do that on a few different options. We can do it on this layer, or we could do it on the croquis layer. We're going to go to the little settings wrench tool, and we're going to say a drawing guide here. So here we see kind of a grid, and we're going to edit the drawing guide. Now, when we edit the drawing guide, we're going to see different options down here, and I recommend grabbing the symmetry tool. This symmetry tool automatically puts the symmetry in the middle of the page. So we're going to say done, and now we want to move the croquis to be centered on that line. And I'm going to select the selection tool, and I'm going to move her until she hits the center. So those little dots are lined up on the center, and then I can start drawing. I'm going to deselect it by selecting the arrow, and if I'm going to start drawing, I'm going to start drawing on the dress. So you can see it says assisted here. I also have this drawing assisted option here, and that gives me this mirror effect. That's the symmetry. So this is the symmetry here, and we are going to go ahead and start drawing. Okay, so you can see that we have a symmetry going on from one side to the other. That's functioning well. And let's go ahead and go back. We're just kind of playing around with it a little bit, getting used to this. And let's say we want to reference another area or another page on here. So we can go and we can see that that symmetry line is still there, but our layer is way down here. We can drag and move that layer into any other layer if we want it there in order to draw and start creating. So let's go ahead and start designing. We are going to take that dress layer and we can move it into any other layer we want to create new groups. But just remember, if you go off of the page at all, it's going to crop the image. So let's say we want to choose one of the necklines here. And we can kind of use this page guide here to flip through the different necklines. And I'm going to be doing a dress. So let's go ahead and choose a neckline for my dress. We're going to go with that gathered one. I haven't used that one before. Go from this layer here, and we're going to drag that into the necklines to create a group. I want to drag that to the top of my necklines. And so now we can see the dress is on the top of the necklines. So I can move that mirror line to match up with this, or we can do different options. We can go back and always have the croquis and reference this and draw it, or we can kind of play around with that assisted mirrored line. So I'm going to show you both options here. So this is the tracing and copy method, which is a little bit trickier because you have to work from the inside of the garment and out, or from the top of the garment and down. You can't go from the top and the bottom and then the outside. I've moved this dress layer to be on top of the necklines, and I want to move that mirrored line once again. So I'm going to grab the wrench tool, edit drawing guide. I'm going to move that mirrored line to be in line with the neckline I want. Say done, and then we're going to start tracing that neckline. Now, if I want a smooth line, I'm going to draw and hold and release. If I'm okay with a more drawn look, then you don't have to hold. But if we're wanting is kind of a smoother look, we're holding it down at the end to get a more complete look that's a little bit more cleaner of a line. Now let's go ahead and move that layer. We're going to move it to be with the sleeves. Let's look at one of the sleeves. That's just a basic sleeve there, which we could definitely go with a basic sleeve. Maybe we'll do that, but with a raglan possibly. So we can move this on top of the sleeve so that we're sure to be drawing on that layer and seeing it completely. We can grab the selection tool and move that to where we want it to go. Now, this is definitely a lot more work to do this copy and tracing method, and I really recommend that you try to use it more as the reference method, which we'll get to in just a little bit here. We're going to edit the drawing guide to move that symmetry line over and say done. We're going to start drawing, make sure we're on that line here and that we have the correct tool selected. And I think I'm going to turn that into a raglan later on, so we'll go ahead and leave that as it is. So let's say I want to now, instead of doing this tracing method, I want to go into the reference method. I'm going to pull her back, the dress, all the way to go down to the croquis group. I'm going to again move that drawing assist guide to be in the center. And then I'm going to move this selection to be on her. So you can see that's a lot of moving around, getting it to be right with that tracing method. Let's do the reference method now. So for the rest of the dress, I want to reference the entire dress silhouette by flipping through towards the dresses, and I want to choose one of the dresses. I have to think about my silhouette that I want. I'm actually really liking this maybe with the gathering. That could look really nice. It's a higher waistline there. So we're going to go ahead and go with this option here. This option here, we're going to kind of eye that for now. I'm going to check and see what number it is. It's just silhouette number 7. I'm going to go back to my dresses here and start drawing. So you can see the sleeves are definitely cutting into her bust area. So we're going to erase some of that area here. So the bust is going to come out a little bit more. And we're going to start drawing the dress in. I'm going to go ahead and make my line thickness a little bit thicker. I'm going to do a raglan sleeve. And then we're going to have that little blouson effect here. And the dress part here. I want to have a nice rounded area toward the bottom. So then I'm going to have a little bit of gathering coming up here. We're going to pull up those fullness lines up like this and pull it back here as well. We're going to have a little bit of gathers towards the sides here. You can tell it's a little bit hard to see until we start coloring it up. And before we start coloring it up, we have to close up our lines. So this is the same concept as it is in Illustrator. We're going to zoom in. We need to make sure any lines are closed. If they're not closed, we're going to be filling in a whole big area, and it's not going to be just the area that we want. Even up here, those tiny little gaps are really going to show. You can move up. And sometimes the mirroring is not perfect from side to side because we're moving that mirror line so much. We want to go ahead and clean it up by removing that mirror line now. So we're going to go back, edit drawing guide, and we're going to take it off of that. And then we can go back and we can erase any parts that are kind of overlapping here from one side to the other. Definitely play around with the size of your eraser too. So now we've cleaned her up pretty well. We're going to go ahead and pull her out of the group so that we can see how the dress looks. That's the dress. Yeah, she's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and color her up. So let's choose a nice color for her. Maybe a little bit more neutral, or actually maybe a little bit of a teal would be nice. Oh, that one was not closed. It went everywhere. So we're going to undo that and look closely what was not closed well. And we're going kind of crazy with our colors here. Maybe even playing around with the ribbing color along the neckline could be nice. You could choose something a little bit darker and play around with that. Play around with sleeve colors or skirt colors, anything like that. Play around with it until you're pleased with it. Crazy fun colors. I don't know about that one, but I think the pink line is throwing it off of it. But it's fun. All right, so there we are. We've now designed our first style. We can go ahead and clean up any other lines that are needed to. And for sure that reference method is going to be a lot easier. You can see it was just a quick little reference back and forth and we are good to go. Let's keep playing around with those colors until we like it. And of course, black is always going to look nice. It's going to be fun with the pink outlining too. So that is the fun of it, and you can play around with even more brush options as far as rendering goes and really change up the colors as well to actually render those. You can go ahead and pull some of these back a little bit to get a little bit of rendering in there. And play around with some of the fullness here. We have lots of different effects, like this could be a nice one possibly. Depends on the thickness as well. And you can just kind of start rendering it up. I can't see it so much, so it's not big enough color difference here. We have the undertone of the black, so it's pulling out more brown, it looks like. But there we go. Now we can see kind of some differences in colors as well for the rendering. That's just kind of how you go along and play with it. We can get another kind of fill in these back little parts here to give it a little bit more depth. We can go ahead and fill the back here with different color there and just kind of play around with those brushes. You can play around with the size, get a smaller size where you need it to go, and give it more depth. It's really a lot of fun to play around with these sketches. It really is. I think you're going to really enjoy it. So let's say we want to add some top stitching to this dress. Why would we have top stitching, and actually what is top stitching? Top stitching is a physical stitch that shows on your garment. So you can see the bottom hemline, there's a top stitch. that's a stitch line, and sometimes we need to have those stitch lines along the bottom hemline of a garment or the sleeve or different areas like the neckline. And this part of the design process actually helps us think of the sewing process as well. So I'm going to select the top stitch, it's under calligraphy. And if I want to add it to the bottom hemline, we're going to switch the color so it's visible. We'll go with the pink again, or maybe we'll go with white. We'll just show it off so we can see it better. And we can just add that top stitching wherever we want. If we just kind of play around with it, we can also create our own brushes with different top stitching. We can play with the top stitching size, making it bigger to show up even more. That's definitely too big, but you can play around with that and see what you like. If you're making a double top stitch, and of course, if we click and hold, we're going to get a nicer line that we can sometimes edit like this. So you could definitely make your own double needle top stitch as well. So as you get further along in your Procreate skill set, you can look up other YouTube videos on how to make a brush, dashed brush, and you can also do an offset as well, which an offset works off of other lines too. I believe you can do that in Procreate. I know you can do that in Illustrator. So I've clicked and held that one to really make it straight. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger to really show up for the camera here. Okay, so we can add an arc into it like that, or we can take away the arc. I don't like how it was not so straight. It's not the best brush, I have to say. There is a little bit of a trickiness when it comes to these brushes, but that's looking nicer. All right, then you can kind of think of the rest of the sewing process. Look at garments in your collection to make sure that you are doing the top stitching where it makes sense. So to do the neckline, I'm going to do a small start and go along there, and then the same thing over here. So you can see we have kind of a strange little zigzag there. It's not exactly the perfect brush, and if we're not holding it down like this, it's not as contour of a line too. So I do recommend trying to hold it down and just play around with those top stitches to get the nice shape that you're looking for. Okay, so we have added some little top stitching to our dress, and we are good to go with that. So at this point, I could duplicate the layer also and play around with other colorways. So let's say I want to go with a more neutral color. And let's say I want to change the line color. I can grab the color of the lines that I want it to be, and oops, didn't quite catch it. It's a little bit tricky, but then we can see it's caught that line. And this one has also caught some of my rendering because I went over that line. So you can see the rendering color changed from this color to that color. You're gonna have to play around with those color effects and see what you like. Small change in those colors can really affect the entire look of the garment. So that's part of the fun in designing, and for sure we play around with those until we're happy. And this contrast is a bit too much for the rendering, but it's fun to play around and just keep doing that with different sketches. So as you get further along, you might want to do a duplicate of the layer a little bit earlier before you do rendering, things like that, but you'll find your own workflow for this. I hope you've enjoyed today's tutorial. It's a lot of fun to play around with this app, and it's so much fun to draw. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.